What we've seen in the UK over the last week is accumulation of a winter of extremely heavy rainfall. We've actually had wetter conditions than we've had in the last 250 years. And so the ground is saturated, we've had high winds, we've had heavy rainfall, really at a level that the country cannot cope with. One thing that's interesting is it's not a case that the flood defences have failed. There are very few cases, in fact if any, where the flood defences have overtopped. This is groundwater where the ground is saturated, where rivers have burst their banks, and that water is now spreading over, in many cases, what were floodplains which have been built on in the last 50 years, and flooding properties that are built in those floodplains. We've obviously seen a very strong response from the military and from the emergency services. It is the case that the military are being used widely. One thing to remember is that it's certainly not the case that the response has failed at the point at which the military are brought in. The military are quite often brought in to fill specific roles that do not sit within the emergency services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because actually we don't need to deal with flooding as a country 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What we are seeing though is the incidence of flooding and severe flooding is increasing year on year. This is something that we're having to deal with more often, and that's perhaps asking questions about whether this is actually more of a permanent response that we need, and if so, where does that best sit? Does it sit with the military and giving them more of a permanent role in flooding in the future, or is it actually something that perhaps needs to sit with the fire service, with additional resources and personnel brought into the fire service specifically to deal with flooding? Certainly what's come out of the discussions we've been having at RUSI, however, is that it's not the response that has failed. The response has, by and large, gone very well. People are being evacuated from homes, they are being looked after where they're being sheltered. If a problem still remains, it's largely with the planning for the flooding. And the Prime Minister has talked about the country needing to be more resilient to flooding, and that does go right from the top of government, the government's strategic approaches to flooding, to the grassroots of what individuals, homes and homeowners are doing to ensure their own resilience. Again, the idea that people have checked is their home on a floodplain, that they've opted into Environment Agency flood warnings, they've thought about what those flood warnings mean and what they might actually need to do when the flood warning increases, that they have perhaps sandbags in their garage or in a cupboard in their home, that they have moved prized possessions that they would be devastated if they lost in a flood to the first floor or to the higher shelves in cupboards. And that they know what to do, they know who to ask for advice to, they know what the recovery process would be if the flooding does happen. Part of resilience is not only assuming that the flooding can be stopped, but actually it's accepting that the flooding that can't be stopped can be dealt with and can be absorbed.